Hey there, thank you for tuning in to another episode of ALPTalks. ALP Co. is a firm that's part of a broader group that's located at Lagos and Abuja, from where we offer both legal and professional services through our sister arm, ALPSL. True to our name and across the continent, we have our sister firm, ALP East Africa, which offers legal services across 4 jurisdictions in the region, namely Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, and Tanzania. Through our collaborative efforts across the continent, we prefer trade advisory and training services for our clients under ALP Trade. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
It's the month of love, and sometimes love does go sour. When it goes sour, many people are uncertain on the next steps to take. And there's this saying that it's always necessary to just, give a dead marriage a decent burial. And many people don't know how to untie the knot. They want to be done with it as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. I have here with me Mrs. Oyinkansola Badejo-Okusanya. She is a partner in the firm. She's also a partner in the litigation and dispute resolution practice and in our family practice in the firm. And my name is Atilolaoluwa Taiwo-Nsirim. We're here today talking about how to seamlessly and painlessly untie the knot when love does go sour. When love goes wrong, how do we walk through it? How do we walk our clients through it?
Okay, yes. Thank you, Atilola. It is the month of love. And yes, love does go wrong sometimes. And so what we're going to be talking about is, in the words of an eminent jurist, how to give a decent burial to a dead marriage. And interestingly enough, first point of call that I'd like to start from is this. A lot of people think it's easy to get a divorce. Interestingly, it is surprisingly difficult to untie that knot. Because the Marriage Act, which is what governs marriages, the celebration of marriages in Nigeria, is designed to protect the sanctity of marriage. So once you've entered into that union, the Matrimonial Causes Act, which is the legislation that governs the dissolution of marriages, which is what the formal technical term for divorce is, dissolution of a marriage, is designed actually to give effect to that Marriage Act, to make sure that even if you eventually get divorced, then you have scaled through all the hurdles that the Matrimonial Causes Act puts in your way, just to ensure that the sanctity of marriage is preserved. So that's the first thing that a lot of people find very strange. So, as we were talking about a scenario earlier on where person A gets married to person B, and say 9 months, 10 months down the line, things go wrong, and one of the parties is just, I can't do this anymore, and moves out. Moves out and effectively marries over. I said 10 months, right?
Yeah.
So another 6 months later, person decides, look, you know what? I don't want to be married anymore, and approaches a lawyer. That's the first shock that a lot of people get. Find out that actually you can't get divorced yet. Because the Matrimonial Causes Act says there's only one circumstance under which marriages will be held to be, if you like, ripe for divorce, to be granted a divorce. And that is that the marriage has broken down irretrievably. That's the only circumstance. Now, what does that mean? The Matrimonial Causes Act prescribes several circumstances under which the court will hold that the marriage has broken down irretrievably. 3 of them are perhaps the most commonly used as reasons to, hold that the marriage has broken down irretrievably. 1, that the parties have lived apart for 2 years and the other party does not object to the granting of a divorce. 2, that the parties have lived apart for 3 years. Whether or not the other party agrees or objects or does not object is of no moment. The court will presume that if you've lived apart for 3 years, then clearly your marriage has irretrievably broken down. It can no longer be retrieved. If you've lived apart for 2 years and the other party says, yes, I also want to be divorced, then the court will presume. The third most commonly used example cited for the marriage having broken down irretrievably is that the respondent, so the respondent is the person who responds to a petition. A petitioner is the person who goes to court to file a petition for divorce. So the third most commonly given example is that the respondent has behaved in a way that the petitioner cannot reasonably be expected to live with him or her, and that way in which the respondent has behaved constitutes intolerable behavior. Those are the exact wordings of the statute, that the respondent has behaved in a way that the petitioner cannot reasonably be expected to live with. The respondent has behaved intolerably, and the petitioner cannot be reasonably be expected to live with that person. It used to be that the circumstances that would constitute intolerable behavior, they're listed in the Matrimonial Causes Act. And it used to be that courts would, strictly fit themselves into those circumstances. I think there are about 7 or 8 of them or so. It used to be. But decided cases have expanded the scope of what constitutes intolerable behavior, outside of the usual, the adulteries. By the way, it's not in all circumstances that the court might find that adultery constitutes intolerable behavior. It depends, again, largely on the circumstances, because each matrimonial cause or divorce proceedings, as they're called, is different. So culture, exposure, background, level of education, these are all things that affect the parties' pleadings and what they present to court and what the court will find to be the intolerable behavior, whether intolerable behavior has really been proved. That leads me to another thing. Everything that a petitioner says in court must be proved. So if a petitioner comes to court and says he or she has behaved in an intolerable way, I cannot reasonably be expected to live with the person. She doesn't listen to me. It's not a grounds for divorce. I'm her husband. She doesn't respect me as a husband. She doesn't listen to me. That's not saying anything. Whatever it is that you say, you must be able to back up. So even though, for instance, just to give an example of how the scope of intolerable behavior has been expanded, the Act does not say if you if you say that if the respondent has alleged that the petitioner suffers from mental illness and therefore that constitutes intolerable behavior that I can't live with, it's not the case that the court will automatically say, oh yes, that constitutes intolerable behavior. You must be able to prove that this is what the person has done. The person has alleged that I have mental health issues and I don't, and that allegation against me as a spouse is something that I cannot be reasonably be expected to live with. That constitutes intolerable behavior.
Yeah.
So, those are the circumstances under which those are the limited circumstances under which a person can file for a divorce. Yeah. And these are found, as you know, in our practice, have often come as a surprise and sometimes shock to people. One, that you can't get a divorce as quickly as you want to sometimes. And two, that the circumstances under which you can get a divorce are limited. You can't just come up with anything.
Flowing from the scenario that you've given earlier, 10 months down the line, one person is tired, moves out, 6 months after moving out, approaches a lawyer. And you mentioned how that's not the case. That person is not able to immediately get a divorce from the court. Does this point to the fact that there's a minimum period after the marriage before a person can approach a court to ask for a dissolution of the marriage?
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, this is the second surprise, that a lot of people find, that it's actually following from the difficulty, in untying this knot.
Yeah.
It's not that easy. You have to have been married for at least 2 years, right, before you can approach the court to dissolve your marriage. Now, we've had circumstances where people have been married for less than a year and they realize that it was a mistake, or they think it was a mistake and they just want out, right? They leave and they think that, well, I can get a divorce. Let's just move on. Let each person go on and get on with their lives.
Yeah.
You have to be patient. You have to wait until at least 2 years has elapsed since you moved out, or since you stopped effectively being married. And even at that, the other party has to consent. Otherwise, you're going to. It doesn't mean you won't get divorced, but it's going to be contested. Or you wait 3 years, and whether the other party consents or not, you can get
your divorce.
Get a divorce.
Yeah. And it takes me to this very common saying that I hear a lot of. I think Nollywood films have broadcasted this as the position of the law in Nigeria, where they'll say, "Can you give the other person a set of papers to sign? Give him the divorce papers to sign. I would like to get a divorce very quickly." And it's just very weird being a barrister, because I know that is definitely not the case. We have to, take the matter to court. We have to adduce evidence before the court. And whatever any party is saying, you have to prove whatever it is you're saying. For example, you refer to the limited circumstances under which a marriage can be dissolved. And you're talking about that the marriage has indeed broken down irretrievably, and how you must have been living apart for a number of periods. And in addition to that, there's also the fact that if, for example, someone just opts and leaves, and it's clear that the moment that person stood up and left, the person intended to completely leave you and leave the marriage. Actually, within a year, there's a term called desertion. If that has happened for a period of 1 year, and it's such a big thing to prove that you have to be sure, and the intention of the party when leaving must have been that the person wanted to abandon you.
Come back. So like I said, starting from the premise that The Marriage Act is designed to protect the sanctity of marriage.
Yeah.
The Matrimonial Causes Act, which covers divorces and dissolution, dissolution of marriage, otherwise called divorce, is designed to ensure that the sanctity of marriage is preserved and protected. So it makes it terribly difficult for you to get a divorce. It's not a walk in the park. So certainly what happens is that you allege that you have been deserted. It has to be clear that the person who left actually left with the intention of not coming back. You have to prove that, right? Yeah. Otherwise, it's not desertion. Yeah. So, we talked earlier on about, 2 years, you can file for a divorce if you get consent of the other party. 3 years, you don't need consent of the other party. There are also limited circumstances under which you can get your marriage annulled.
Yeah.
Yes, annulled or dissolved within a period of less than, if you've been married less than 2 years, a year or even less. But there are limited circumstances, again, because the Matrimonial Causes Act tries to preserve the sanctity of marriage just as the Marriage Act does. So you have to really jump through a lot of hoops to convince a court to dissolve your marriage of less than a year, because the courts start from the premise that marriage is a union that must be preserved at all costs.
Yeah, the vows must be upheld.
Yeah, the vows must be upheld. So unless, for instance, right, you have a situation whereby in the eyes of the law, you are never married in the first place. That's where the word annulment. So annulment means to nullify something, that it's like it was a nullity. It never happened. In the eyes of the law, it's not. It's not.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the annulment of a marriage, and I'm just wondering, like, okay, I've been married to this person for let's give a scenario. Let me not personalize it. Person A, person B, just went to a church down the road and asked the pastor to join them in holy matrimony. And, they've been together about 10 years. And in just one conversation one day with a couple of family friends, they talk about, the daughter of a family friend is about to get married and they want to use a hall. And they're talking about getting a license. And this couple are seated there wondering what is going on. And they realized that they never inquired whether the church where they got married actually had a license.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that you raised, because truth be told, there are a lot of people walking around thinking they're married, they're actually not married. So if they ever wanted to get a divorce, they probably find it very easy because they're really not married.
Not married.
The truth is, under the Marriage Act, right, only certain places have been designed licensed places of marriage. So a licensed place of worship, emphasis on the word license, a licensed place of worship. And it's not all churches that are licensed places of worship. They have to have how should I say? They have to have a license to be able to marry people. And therefore, what you sign in the church is actually a document provided by the government, and not a certificate or something that you sign that has the name of the church on it. There are many churches that don't have licenses. Also, you want to get married, say you have a nice beautiful garden somewhere, and you've always dreamt of having a garden wedding, and by the waterside and all of that, and you say, all I need to do is bring the pastor from my church or the reverend from my church to actually marry you, and what you don't realize is that you need to have obtained a form that allows, that in effect redesignates that location as a licensed place of worship, and also a license that allows the person who is coming to marry you to conduct the marriage. So if the person who is marrying you does not have a license to marry, that's a grounds for annulment. If the place in which you get married is not a licensed place where marriages can take place under the law, it also means that your marriage can be annulled. Other limited circumstances are, for example, where there's an element of deceit. So, for example, one party failed to disclose something about herself or himself to the other party, like, for example, that you have mental health issues, that prevent you from being a spouse, or that means that you engage in behavior that is inimical to the union of your union, then those are grounds for an annulment or dissolving the marriage with less than the stipulated minimum requirement. Again, like I said, these are limited circumstances, and they're not circumstances that would avail everybody. The important thing in all of this is that people must seek advice and seek good advice. So we've had situations whereby, when you want out, you just want out.
Yeah.
You just want out now. You go to seek advice from a lawyer, and they say, yeah, of course, yes, let's file the divorce. The Matrimonial Causes Act is one of the most technical pieces of legislation I have ever come across. And many twists and turns.
Yes.
And with due respect, many lawyers are not completely versed in it. Yes, with it. And so it's not improbable sometimes that you find lawyers that don't really, have not really paid attention to the details. So you file the petition. And the first thing that the other party does is to file an objection, saying that this petition has been brought earlier than the statutory requirement. And of course, the court has no choice but to strike it out. And then you have to start all over again. And so for you who wanted to do this very quickly as possible, it can be very frustrating. Very frustrating. So, the things to bear in mind, the things to remember: one, limited circumstances under which a person can seek for dissolution of marriage, and the requirements that you must meet, and also when you're getting married, it's lovely to have that nice location and all that, but please find out what needs to happen. So while we're talking about love going wrong, let's talk about love going right as well.
Talking about requirements, it makes me think of the legal requirements for parties or a person who is seeking the dissolution of a marriage to have been domiciled in Nigeria. And what does it mean to be domiciled in Nigeria? And I'm just thinking, a person who lives in Nigeria and intends to continue to live in Nigeria for the rest of their lives. So you have two people who, one person went to England for their masters and then met another person who is a British citizen. And they got married in
Could
England.
even be a Nigerian.
Could even be a Nigerian born or living the last...
But it's a British citizen, lives in
Britain. And they got married over there, and one of the parties gets a gig, and the family has to move to Nigeria.
Okay.
So they moved to Nigeria, and
so this is an interesting scenario you're painting. So because, for example, so they moved to Nigeria. Right. But the person who was living there, right, to all intents and purposes, a British citizen, still resident in Britain, still has ties in Britain, has moved back with his or her spouse, right? Not really with the intention of coming to settle here permanently. Still retaining and maintaining their residency, citizenship, and so on and so forth. Now, within a year of coming back, somehow or the other, they find that living in Nigeria is not the same as living in Britain. And things go so bad that they decide, that person decides, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. And then wants to file, or actually files a divorce petition here. One of the grounds upon which you can successfully file a petition is that you must be domiciled in Nigeria.
Yeah.
You must have been domiciled in Nigeria for at least 3 years preceding the
filing
divorce
of that petition.
And you must, domicile means you must intend to make Nigeria your permanent residence. Now, from the scenario you've painted, those requirements have not been met.
They've not been met.
If the other party raises an objection, right, it will succeed on if he or she is able to prove that one, that person has not been domiciled in Nigeria for up to 3 years, and two, that person is actually has his or her domicile in another place and does not intend to make Nigeria so
their permanent home.
This is what part of what we're saying, that it's incredibly difficult to get it because there are many requirements to meet, and this is all part of the courts trying to ensure that as much as possible they give opportunities to parties to try and resolve their issues. So one of the things they do, for example, is they tend to give long adjournments. There's a compulsory conference that parties must hold, and this is in an attempt to resolve ancillary issues, what we call ancillary reliefs, like say where
custody with children,
or where there's marital property or maintenance. Somebody wants to go on, but you have to maintain me and the children and so on and so forth. So so these scenarios are very interesting ones.
And when we're talking about filing a divorce and seeking orders, it's not just the divorce. So say, for example, children are involved, like you mentioned, the custody of the children and the access arrangements with regard to just children is something that the courts would have to consider. The courts would also have to consider if there are any matrimonial properties and in what ways to divide it between the parties, if there have been contributions from both parties, determining really if there are even matrimonial properties to start with.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So that's also another thing that creates, matrimonial causes can actually be very emotionally charged. Very emotionally charged. It's the reason why parties must always seek good advice, good counsel, right? You must have a lawyer who, is patient enough to listen, because every matrimonial cause or every divorce proceeding is different from another one. There's no open and shut one. There's no one size fits all. You must have a lawyer that is knowledgeable enough to know the right strategy to adopt, given the circumstances. So, for example, if you have urgent custody issues, for example, do you file your application at the High Court?
Do you go to the
file it at the family court? Not everybody.
That's at the magistrate court level.
Yes. Where it's often a lot faster.
Yes, quicker.
Not everybody has these nuances. So, and then also, you need a lawyer that is charitable enough to recognize when this love doesn't actually have to go wrong. And encourages, just as the courts would do, some sort of reconciliation. And then even if reconciliation is impossible, again, back to that our favorite saying, just work towards giving a decent burial to a dead marriage. Because there's life after this. Sometimes there are children involved. There's property, and you don't want to be defined by your past or by your mistakes, So with respect to custody, that's, oh my goodness, that's probably part of the family law practice that, gets to me the most. In Nigeria, minors are classified as children that are not yet up to the age of 18, and so what we find is that, say the marriage has broken down irretrievably and parties have been able to prove by any one of the circumstances listed in the Matrimonial Causes Act that either that they've lived apart for 2 years and the other party doesn't consent, or they've lived apart for 3 years, or that the respondent has behaved intolerably and the petitioner cannot reasonably be expected to continue to live with that person. Then oftentimes it turns to relief, and most common reliefs are custody of the minor children, and maintenance and property.
Yeah.
With respect to custody, what we find a lot of the time is that parties tend to weaponize
the children. It's
yes.
an emotional venture, really.
Yes, it is. It is. Particularly the party that has custody of the children, physical custody of the children, which means actually has the children with him or her. Especially where it's a very bitter divorce, then at all costs you don't want the other party to see the children or for them to even spend time. Sometimes there's the fear of kidnapping, abducting the children, taking them, them elsewhere, which you know, those fears, you know, at this point in time, trust has completely broken down.
Yeah.
So you need counsel that can navigate you through these trust issues, and help parties to reach it. Because, say for example, one party has asked for sole custody, right, of the children, and has the custody of the children at that point in time, and is determined to ensure that the other party, they just out of sheer bitterness, you know, it could prove inimical because the court is watching this, and courts have seen this all the time. They can tell when parties are weaponizing the children. They can tell when a party is just deliberately keeping the children or the child away from seeing the other party. And they can also tell somewhat when there might be a real danger that if this other party has access to the child or to the children, anything could happen, you know. Although that being said, particularly where we find the abductions, especially abroad, Interpol has proved to be very effective in getting those children back. So what I usually advise clients, as you know, is don't do it, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, if you do, you're going to end up losing that child or those children. I'll tell you a recent scenario. This couple got divorced, and then the lady got custody of the child, and then she jackpad. And she didn't inform the
other party,
the estranged husband, that she was jackpying. So they just left. And he went looking for them. He didn't know where they were. Eventually, he found them somewhere in the States. And he filed in the States. She was forced to get a lawyer. She spent money she didn't have getting the lawyer. And at the end of the day, the court found that she had done a wrong thing and mandated her to return the child. Now, when she was returning the child, it was on the understanding that because the child has started school and so on and so forth, the child would come back after Christmas. When the child got here, father refused to return the child. He said, the child will go back eventually, but he wants a document, a court-ordered document that gives him rights, because she denied him access to the child. He didn't know where they were. He doesn't want a situation whereby he will allow the child to go back.
And then he can't get the child again.
They're still at it now. So it's really not worth it, you know. Far better to sit down and talk things over. And this is where, you know, the right counsel comes into play, because she said that her lawyer told her that if she went, there's nothing he can do. And unfortunately,
that's not the case.
Yes, she has found out the hard way that that's not the case. So, you know,
counsel is very important.
These custody issues can be very, very naughty. The other thing is maintenance, you know. It's fairly straightforward, where the circumstances show that, you know, one party or the other. Oh, and by the way, the maintenance it doesn't always flow from the man to the woman. The maintenance can flow from the woman to the man. If it is proved that the woman has, you know, more, is wealthier, you know, has
maintained a standard of living for the man.
Exactly. She can be made to pay maintenance to him. The other thing is matrimonial property. Well, invariably, when the love is all good and everything is going fine, invariably people don't pay attention to things like who signs what, the details, exactly. Meanwhile, the devil is in the details. So, property, for example, title documents could be in one person's name. Both of you might have contributed to it. Your money might have been part of it. Yeah, but how do you prove it?
One person's name
and courts are not concerned with sentiments.
Absolutely.
You have to have the hard facts.
Prove hard evidence.
Yes, and the fact that you are married does not necessarily mean that the property is matrimonial property. Now, courts have interpreted this liberally. So, for example, we've seen decisions where even where the spouse, the wife, did not actually contribute money to the purchase of the property, courts have held that by providing an enabling environment for the husband to go out and take care of the children, take care of the home, allowing the man to go out and make the money, that she's entitled.
There is a contribution.
Yes, and it doesn't. So the contribution doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. But all these things need to be proved. So invariably, like I said, by the time it's gotten to this point, invariably,
most times it's too late to get any other evidence.
Yeah, but what I always tell people, say sometimes we have clients that come in when they're still contemplating, right? And we say to them, just keep records. Very important to keep records. It sounds a bit cynical to tell people, okay, look, you're all lovey-dovey now, but anything can go wrong. So make sure that whatever is important to you, make sure.
Yourself.
But it's cynical. But the truth is that, well, I mean, the Hollywood stars have shown us with their prenuptial agreements that it may sound very hard, but it does give its protection. So all I just say to clients that come in is that, look, you know what, you're contemplating divorce, you think that things are going that way,
you need to begin to gather your
just
evidence.
Keep records and gather your evidence, because we don't have a no-fault divorce system in Nigeria like they have in some other jurisdictions where you can get a divorce without having to prove that nobody's at fault. We just don't want. You don't have to prove it. But in Nigeria, under our laws, you still have to prove
that one person
is at fault, or and the divorce still, the court still has to go through the evidence. And as a matter of fact, there are circumstances where the courts have held that a party has not proved that the marriage has broken down irretrievably. There is an indication of, there's a provision in your petition where you have to stipulate that you have not connived, colluded, or condoned
any acts.
Yes, so you remember earlier on you were talking about desertion and how it's not every act of moving out that constitutes desertion, right? Desertion means that person must have moved out with the intention
to abandon.
Yes, and if the person can prove that I didn't abandon you. I mean, I still come back home every now and then. I still do this, I still do that or the other. It can prove to be a
little bit of a tricky situation.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, in the end, it's just necessary, to get your evidence, to
keep your records.
Keep your records. Protect yourself. Don't be completely swept away. I know it may sound funny, but cynical, yes, but don't be completely swept away. You do not want a situation where you are left with no recourse, with no solution, or with no protection.
Yes,
and that's why you need to just enlighten self-interest. Just protect yourself as best and as much as possible that you can.
As a matter of fact, as well, just talking about that, and this will be my final note from here. We do have scenarios, particularly in this part of the world, right, where we can sometimes look at the word marriage in a very loose manner. We have seen increasingly circumstances where a couple get they get separated. They separate. And they could be separated for years, right? They had matrimonial property, they had children, wife moves out, husband moves out, they're separated.
Separated.
10 years down the line, the man meets someone else and he gets married. There's no registry wedding, they just have a traditional wedding, and then the man dies. And the second wife,
administration of estate issues,
assumes that
she's the wife.
She's the wife, but the first wife, who was never divorced from her husband, shows up.
Still the legal wife.
Still his legal wife.
Still his legal wife.
It's even worse where he dies intestate.
Yeah. Without a will.
Even after, yes, without
a will.
Even after all this time, you
She's his
may
wife.
find out that you are actually left with nothing. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, completely different day.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. For more inquiries and to catch up with our latest updates, follow us on our socials and visit our website alp.company and alptrade.africa. See you next time. Bye.